The whispers started the moment. Josephine Evans stepped through the carved oak doors of the Grand Silver Hotel's dining room, her cream-colored traveling dress rustling against the doorframe, as 20 pairs of eyes turned to assess her worth and found her lacking. She'd endured such moments before, countless times during her 22 years, but the sting never quite dulled, especially not here in Hill City, South Dakota, where she'd come seeking a fresh start in this wild territory of 1878. The dining room gleamed with crystal chandeliers imported all the way from St. Louis, their light catching on silverware and the jewels adorning the throats of women who measured their value in the circumference of their waists. Josephine knew what they saw when they looked at her. Soft curves where there should be angles, fullness where society demanded concavity, a woman who took up more space than propriety allowed. Her Aunt Margaret had written that Hill City was growing, that respectable positions were available for educated young women, that perhaps here in the Dakota Territory things might be different than they'd been in Boston. But the looks she received now, the subtle shifting away as she moved toward the dining area, told her that geography changed nothing about the cruelty of human nature. "I'm terribly sorry, miss," the maitre d' said, his thin mustache twitching as he materialized before her like a disapproving specter. "But all our tables are currently occupied. Perhaps you might prefer to take your meal in your room." Josephine's throat tightened. She could see at least 3 empty tables from where she stood, their white linen cloths pristine and waiting. Behind the maitre d', 2 women in elaborate bustles leaned together, their whispered conversation punctuated by barely concealed laughter. She recognized the sound. It had followed her through every ballroom, every church social, every gathering where her mother had desperately tried to secure her a suitable match. "I can see several available tables," Josephine said, keeping her voice steady despite the heat climbing her neck. "I'll just take that one near the window, thank you." The maitre d' stepped deliberately into her path. "I'm afraid those tables are reserved, miss. As I said, perhaps your room would be more comfortable." The word hung unspoken in the air between them. Appropriate. More appropriate for someone like her to hide away, to not offend the sensibilities of the other guests with her presence, to not take up space that belonged to those deemed more deserving. Josephine was preparing to retreat, to swallow her humiliation and flee to the safety of her rented room, when a voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "Now that's curious, because I don't see any reserved signs on those tables." The voice belonged to a man rising from a corner booth, his tall frame unfolding with an easy grace that spoke of hours in the saddle. He wore dusty trail clothes, a dark vest over a blue shirt that had seen better days, and a hat he now removed to reveal hair the color of sun-dried wheat. His face was weathered but kind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. He couldn't have been more than 26 or 27, with the lean build of someone who worked hard for his living. "Mr. Foster," the maitre d' sputtered, "I was merely suggesting that the young lady might prefer more privacy." "Seems to me the young lady said exactly what she preferred." The man, Mr. Foster, crossed the dining room with long strides, his boots echoing on the polished floor. Several diners watched with open curiosity, their earlier conversation forgotten. "And since my table's got more room than I need, maybe she'd care to join me instead of sitting alone." He pulled out the chair across from his place setting, the scraping sound loud in the suddenly quiet room. Then he looked directly at Josephine, and his eyes, she noticed, were the warm brown of river stones, holding no judgment, no mockery, just an invitation as simple and honest as sunrise. "Madam, would you do me the honor of sitting by me?" I promise I've got better table manners than most of the men in this territory, and the company would be mighty welcome." Josephine's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to not become the spectacle she was already becoming, to retreat and lick her wounds in private. But something in his expression, in the straightforward way he held her gaze, made her pause. There was no pity there, no condescension. Just a genuine offer from one human being to another. "I wouldn't want to impose on your meal," she managed, though her feet were already carrying her forward as if they'd made the decision without consulting her mind. No imposition at all. He waited until she reached the table, then gently pushed the chair in as she sat, his movements courteous without being performative. "In fact, you'd be doing me a favor. I've been trying to figure out what half these fancy French words on the menu mean for the past 10 minutes. He reclaimed his own seat, and Josephine noticed the maitre d' hovering uncertainly, clearly torn between enforcing whatever unspoken policy he'd been invoking and offending a paying customer. Mr. Foster solved the problem by picking up the leather-bound menu and handing it to Josephine with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Now then, what do you suppose consommé is when it's at home?" Despite herself, despite the lingering humiliation and the eyes still watching from other tables, Josephine felt a smile tug at her lips. "It's a type of clear soup, generally made with beef or chicken stock. See, I knew you'd be useful company." He signaled a waiter, who approached with considerably more alacrity than the maitre d' had shown Josephine. "We'll both have the roast beef dinner and whatever that soup is to start, and bring the lady whatever she'd like to drink. Tea would be lovely," Josephine said softly. "Coffee for me, strong enough to strip paint if you've got it." The waiter nodded and disappeared, leaving them in a bubble of relative privacy despite the interested glances still drifting their way. Josephine folded her hands in her lap, uncertain how to navigate this unexpected turn of events. "I'm Robert Foster," the cowboy said, extending his hand across the table in a gesture that was more Western than proper, but somehow felt right. "Most folks call me Rob. I run a horse ranch about 15 miles south of here, up in the Black Hills foothills." Josephine hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His palm was calloused, his grip firm but careful. "Josephine Evans. I've just arrived from Boston yesterday. I'm to be the new teacher at the schoolhouse starting next week." "A teacher." Rob's expression brightened with genuine interest. "Well, that's fine news for Hill City. The last teacher we had was about 100 years old and deaf as a post. Good man, but the children didn't learn much beyond how to speak real loud." That surprised a laugh out of Josephine, small and startled. "I promise my hearing is quite adequate." "I can see that." Rob leaned back as the waiter returned with their drinks. "So what brings a Boston lady all the way out to the Dakota territory? Can't imagine the big city schools were short on teachers." The question was asked lightly, but Josephine caught the genuine curiosity beneath it. She wrapped her hands around her teacup, letting the warmth seep into her palms. The truth was complicated, layered with disappointment and desperate hope, but something about Rob's open expression made her want to be honest. "My Aunt Margaret lives here. She's been writing to me for years about the opportunities in the growing territories. And after it became clear that Boston held no future for me, the idea of a fresh start became rather appealing." She didn't elaborate on what no future meant. Didn't mention the series of failed courtships, the pitying looks from her mother's friends, the quiet devastation of watching her younger, slimmer sister marry well, while Josephine remained conspicuously unattached. Didn't need to mention the final humiliation of being asked by her own father if perhaps she might consider a convent, since matrimony seemed unlikely to be in her cards. But Rob seemed to hear what she hadn't said anyway. His expression softened, and he took a long sip of his coffee before speaking. Well, their loss is our gain. Hill City needs good teachers more than we need another saloon, though you wouldn't know it from how many of those we've got. He set down his cup. And for what it's worth, Miss Evans, those people who made you feel unwelcome when you came in, they don't speak for this town. Most folks out here care more about what you can do and what kind of person you are than what you look like doing it. Most folks, Josephine repeated quietly. But not all. No, Rob admitted. Not all. Prejudice and small-mindedness aren't exclusive to any particular place I've found. But out here, people tend to be more direct about things. You know where you stand. And folks who prove themselves valuable, well, they earn respect regardless of what narrow-minded people might think. Their soup arrived, and they ate in companionable silence for a few moments. The consommé was rich and savory, warming Josephine from the inside. She snuck glances at Rob between spoonfuls, trying to understand why this stranger had chosen to intervene on her behalf. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally. "Invite me to sit with you. You didn't have to get involved." Rob set down his spoon and met her eyes directly. "My mother was a large woman. Tall, strong, built like she could wrestle a bear and come out winning. My father loved her more than life itself, thought she was the most beautiful creature God ever made. But I remember going into town with her, seeing how some people looked at her, the comments they'd make when they thought I wasn't listening. Made me madder than a hornet in a jar." He reached for his coffee, his jaw tight with old anger. "She died when I was 16. Fever took her during a bad winter. And I remember thinking at her funeral how some of those same people who'd been cruel to her were standing there crying, talking about what a loss she was to the community, and I wanted to scream at them. Because they'd had the chance to know her, to appreciate her, and they'd wasted it on judging her for something that didn't matter one bit." Josephine's throat tightened with emotion. "I'm sorry for your loss. It was 10 years ago now, but I still think about her every day. She taught me that the measure of a person has nothing to do with their size or shape, or whether they fit into some ridiculous ideal that changes with the seasons anyway. It's about their character, their kindness, their strength." He smiled, and it was sad and warm at the same time. "So when I saw that pompous fool trying to turn you away, I heard my mother's voice in my head telling me to do something about it. And I generally try to listen when my mother speaks, even if she's only in my memory now." Josephine blinked rapidly, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. She couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to her with such unvarnished honesty, such simple decency. In Boston, everything had been subtext and implication, cutting remarks dressed in polite language. This direct Western frankness was foreign but refreshing. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate for the gift he'd given her. "Nothing to thank me for, just common courtesy, which apparently isn't that common anymore." Rob's expression lightened as the waiter arrived with their main course. "Now, tell me about Boston." "I've never been east of the Missouri River." "What's it like?" They talked through the rest of dinner, the conversation flowing as easily as water. Josephine told him about the cobblestone streets and the harbor, the libraries and theaters, the strict social hierarchies that governed everything from where you could sit in church to whom you could invite to tea. Rob listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was really hearing her, not just waiting for his turn to speak. In turn, he told her about life on his ranch, about the horses he raised and trained, the harsh winters and beautiful summers, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. He spoke of the Black Hills with a reverence that suggested they were more cathedral than landscape, describing the way the light hit the ponderosa pines and turned them golden, the streams so clear you could count the stones on the bottom. "It sounds beautiful," Josephine said wistfully. "I've never been much of one for the outdoors, I'm afraid. My family wasn't particularly adventurous. Never too late to start." Rob grinned. "Though I'll warn you, teaching in Hill City is going to require some outdoor tolerance. The schoolhouse isn't exactly in the middle of town, and come winter, getting there can be an adventure in itself." "I'm prepared for challenges," Josephine said, though truthfully she was beginning to wonder what she'd gotten herself into. Boston winters were cold, but she'd heard tales of Dakota blizzards that made New England storms look like spring showers. Rob must have seen the flicker of concern cross her face because he leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You'll do fine, Miss Evans. I can tell you've got spine. Anyone who can walk into a room where they're not wanted and hold their head high has the kind of strength that matters out here." "I didn't feel very strong," Josephine admitted. "I was about 2 seconds from running back to my room." "But you didn't. That's what counts." He signaled for the check, then held up a hand when Josephine reached for her small purse. "Please let me. Consider it a welcome to Hill City gift." "That's very generous, but I couldn't possibly." "You can, and you will," Rob said firmly but kindly. "Besides, I'm the one who invited you to sit by me, remember? Wouldn't be proper to invite a lady to dinner and then make her pay." Josephine wanted to argue further, but something in his expression told her he wouldn't budge. Instead, she inclined her head in acceptance. "Then thank you, Mr. Foster. This has been the most pleasant meal I've had in longer than I can remember." "Rob," he corrected. "And if you're going to be living in Hill City, I hope it's the first of many pleasant meals, not the last." They rose from the table together, and Josephine was acutely aware of the eyes still watching them, the whispers that would undoubtedly follow. But somehow, with Rob walking beside her toward the dining room exit, she found she cared less than she had before. His presence was solid, reassuring, a buffer against the judgment of strangers. At the base of the grand staircase that led to the guest rooms, Rob paused and turned to face her. "I come into town most Saturdays to pick up supplies and check my post office box. If you're not too busy settling in, I'd be honored to show you around Hill City properly. Make sure you know where everything is before your teaching duties start." Josephine's practical side warred with the flutter of hope in her chest. She barely knew this man. It would be forward to accept such an invitation, improper by Boston standards. But then again, Boston standards had never served her particularly well, and there was nothing in Rob's invitation that suggested anything beyond friendly assistance. "I think I'd like that very much," she heard herself say. "My aunt is expecting me for tea tomorrow afternoon, but I'm free in the morning." Rob's smile was worth the breach of propriety. 10 o'clock tomorrow, then. I'll meet you in the hotel lobby." 10 o'clock, Josephine agreed. She watched him tip his hat and stride toward the hotel exit, his easy confidence parting the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. Several people stared after him, then looked back at Josephine with renewed interest, as if trying to reassemble their understanding of the scene they'd witnessed. Let them stare, Josephine thought with a defiance that felt new and fragile. Let them whisper. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt like perhaps coming to Hill City hadn't been a mistake after all. That night, lying in her hotel bed with moonlight streaming through the lace curtains, Josephine replayed the evening in her mind. She thought about Rob's kindness, his easy manner, the way he'd spoken about his mother with such love and lingering grief. She thought about his invitation for tomorrow, and felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel, Anticipation. Sleep came slowly, but when it finally arrived, Josephine dreamed not of Boston and its disappointed expectations, but of golden hills and clear streams, of wide skies and the warm brown eyes of a cowboy who'd pulled out a chair and changed everything. Morning arrived with bright sunshine streaming through Josephine's window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She rose and dressed carefully, choosing a practical walking dress in deep green that her mother had always said did nice things for her complexion. The hotel's dining room was less crowded at breakfast, and she managed to secure a table without incident, though she noticed a few curious glances from the staff who'd witnessed last night's events. At precisely 10 o'clock, Josephine descended to the lobby, her heart beating faster than the simple outing warranted. Rob was already waiting, hat in hand, looking freshly scrubbed and wearing a clean shirt that suggested he'd taken some care with his appearance. The smile that broke across his face when he saw her made something warm unfurl in Josephine's chest. "Miss Evans," he greeted, offering his arm. "Ready for your grand tour?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Josephine replied, taking his arm and trying not to notice how solid it felt beneath her hand. Hill City in the late summer of 1878 was a study in contrasts. The main street boasted several impressive buildings constructed of locally quarried stone and lumber hauled from the Black Hills, speaking to the town's aspirations of permanence and respectability. The Grand Silver Hotel where Josephine was staying stood 3 stories tall, its Victorian architecture looking slightly incongruous against the backdrop of pine-covered hills. Next to it, the First Bank of Hill City occupied an equally impressive structure, its windows barred and door solid. But between these monuments to civilization, false-fronted wooden buildings housed saloons, general stores, a barber shop, and various other enterprises that served the miners, ranchers, and settlers flooding into the Dakota territory. The sidewalks were wooden planks that echoed under their feet, and the street itself was dirt, churned to mud in the spring and dusty in the summer heat. "There's Miller's Mercantile," Rob said, pointing to a large store on the corner. "George Miller and his wife Ruth run it. They're good people, fair prices, and Ruth keeps a running tab for teachers and preachers, knowing that pay can be irregular. They've got everything from fabric to feed, and if they don't have what you need, Ruth will order it from Rapid City." They walked on, Rob pointing out the livery stable where he kept a horse when he stayed overnight in town, the post office where mail arrived twice weekly on the stage from Rapid City, the church with its white painted steeple visible from anywhere in town. His commentary was punctuated with bits of local history and gossip, delivered with a humor that had Josephine smiling despite her nervousness about her new home. "And down this way," Rob said, guiding her down a side street, "is probably the most important stop on the tour." The building he led her to was small but tidy, a single-room structure painted white with green shutters. A small bell tower rose from one end, and a neat hand-painted sign declared it to be Hill City School. A few scattered desks were visible through the windows, along with a large slate board and a wood stove that would be essential come winter. "It's not much to look at," Rob admitted, "but the town takes pride in having it. Most mining camps don't bother with schools, but Hill City's founders wanted to prove this was going to be a real town, not just a temporary camp that would dry up when the gold ran out." "It's perfect," Josephine said, and meant it. The schoolhouse was simple but clean, well-maintained and clearly cared for. She could imagine herself there, teaching children their letters and numbers, maybe reading to them from her collection of books she'd shipped ahead separately. "When do I meet the school board?" "Monday morning." "There are 5 board members, including my neighbor Samuel Crawford and Dr. Harrison Walsh. They're reasonable men, mostly interested in making sure the children learn and that you don't run off with the school funds." Rob grinned. "The funds being approximately $47.63, last I heard." Josephine laughed. "I think I can resist that temptation." They continued their tour, Rob introducing her to various shopkeepers and townsfolk they encountered. Most were welcoming, though Josephine didn't miss the occasional sidelong glance or whispered comment. Rob seemed to notice too, his jaw tightening slightly, but he never acknowledged the rudeness directly. Instead, he simply continued treating Josephine with consistent courtesy and respect, making it clear by his actions what he thought of small-minded gossip. By noon, they'd covered most of the town, and Rob suggested lunch at a small restaurant called Kate's Kitchen, which he promised had the best fried chicken in the territory. The establishment was more modest than the hotel dining room, with checkered cloths on the tables and a cheerful woman in her 40s managing both the cooking and serving with efficient good humor. "Rob Foster, I haven't seen you in weeks," Kate exclaimed as they entered. "Where have you been hiding?" "Working, Kate. Some of us have to earn our keep," Rob teased. "Kate, this is Miss Josephine Evans, the new school teacher." "Miss Evans, this is Kate Morrison, the finest cook in Dakota territory and the terror of anyone who tries to leave her establishment without cleaning their plate." Kate laughed and swatted at him with her towel before turning appraising eyes on Josephine. "A school teacher? Well, isn't that lovely? We need more educated women in this town, balance out all the rough men." Her gaze was warm and assessing but not unkind. "You look like you could use a good meal, dear. Teaching is hungry work. Sit yourselves down and I'll bring out my chicken special." They claimed a table by the window, and true to her word, Kate soon appeared with plates piled high with crispy fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, and green beans that actually looked fresh despite it being late in the season. The food was delicious, simple but perfectly prepared, and Josephine found herself eating with more appetite than she'd had in months. "So tell me about your ranch," Josephine said between bites. "You said you raise horses," Rob nodded, finishing his mouthful before answering. "Mostly working horses, the kind ranchers and farmers need. Steady, strong, reliable. I've got about 40 head right now, including a few breeding mares. I break and train them myself, which is time-consuming but means I know exactly what the buyer's getting." "That sounds like demanding work." "It is, but I love it. There's something honest about working with horses. They don't lie, don't pretend to be something they're not. They're just themselves, and you either learn to understand them or you don't." He took a sip of water. "I've got a hand who helps out, a kid named Tommy who's got a natural way with animals. Between the two of us, we manage pretty well." "Do you live alone on the ranch?" Josephine asked, then immediately worried the question was too personal. But Rob didn't seem to mind. "Just me and Tommy, who sleeps in the bunkhouse. It's a simple setup, nothing fancy. My house is small, 2 rooms really, but it's solid and warm in winter. I built it myself 3 years ago when I first claimed the land." "You built it yourself?" Josephine couldn't hide her surprise. "In Boston, men hired builders. The idea of constructing your own home with your own hands seemed almost impossibly ambitious." Rob shrugged, but she could see pride in his eyes. "That's how it's done out here. You claim your land, you build your shelter, you make it work. I had help from some neighbors for the heavy lifting, and I returned the favor when they needed it. That's how community works in the territory. We take care of each other." Josephine thought about Boston's rigid social structures, the carefully maintained boundaries between classes, the way help was purchased rather than exchanged. "It sounds like a very different kind of life from what I'm used to." "It is. Rob agreed. But different doesn't mean worse. Just different. You'll figure out your place here, Miss Evans. Give it time. They finished their meal talking about lighter topics, the conversation flowing as easily as it had the night before. Kate refused to let Josephine pay for her meal, declaring that the first lunch was on the house for Hill City's new teacher, and Josephine was touched by the unexpected generosity. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm but not oppressive, the air carrying hints of pine from the surrounding hills. Rob walked her back toward the hotel, their pace leisurely, neither seeming eager to end the outing. "Thank you for today," Josephine said as they reached the hotel steps. "You've been incredibly kind, Mr. Foster. I mean, Rob. I'm not sure what I did to deserve such hospitality, but I'm grateful for it." Rob's expression grew serious, though his eyes remained warm. "You don't have to do anything to deserve basic human decency, Miss Evans. That's freely given, or it should be. As for the rest, well, I've enjoyed your company. You're easy to talk to, intelligent, and you laugh at my jokes, which is always appreciated." Josephine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I suspect you say that to all the new school teachers." "Only the ones I like," Rob said with a grin. Then his expression sobered. "I know you've probably got a lot to do before school starts, but I was hoping maybe I could call on you again. Perhaps next Saturday, if you're not busy." The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications. In Boston, this would be the beginning of a formal courtship, something that would require chaperones and strict protocols. But this wasn't Boston, and Josephine found she didn't want to hide behind old rules that had never served her well anyway. "I'd like that," she said simply. "I'd like that very much." Rob's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Then it's a date. I'll come by the hotel. Maybe we could take a ride out to see some of the countryside if the weather holds. You can't really know the Black Hills until you've seen them up close." "That sounds wonderful, though I should warn you I'm not much of a rider. I've got a gentle mare who's perfect for beginners. She's so calm she's practically sleepwalking half the time." Rob tipped his hat. "Until Saturday then, Miss Evans." "Josephine," she said impulsively. "If I'm to call you Rob, you should call me Josephine." His smile widened. "Until Saturday then, Josephine." She watched him walk away, his long-legged stride carrying him down the wooden sidewalk until he turned the corner and disappeared. Only then did she allow herself to fully feel the jumble of emotions swirling in her chest. Hope, fear, excitement, and something else she didn't quite dare name yet. The rest of the week passed in a blur of activity. Josephine met with her Aunt Margaret, a spry widow in her 60s who'd come west after her husband died, and now ran a successful boarding house. Margaret was thrilled to see her niece and immediately began introducing her to what she called the respectable ladies of Hill City, which turned out to be a collection of merchants' wives, the doctor's wife, and several other women who formed the backbone of the town's social structure. The meeting with the school board on Monday went smoothly. The 5 men were indeed reasonable, more concerned with her qualifications and teaching philosophy than her appearance. She presented her certificates from the Boston Normal School, discussed her experience tutoring children of various ages, and outlined her approach to education with confidence born of genuine passion for teaching. They approved her appointment unanimously, and she left with a set of keys to the schoolhouse and a promise that her salary of $40 per month would be paid on the first Monday of each month. She spent the next several days preparing the schoolhouse for the upcoming term. The previous teacher had left it reasonably organized, but Josephine wanted to put her own stamp on the space. She rearranged the desks to maximize light from the windows, created a small reading corner with cushions she'd brought from Boston, and spent hours going through the meager supply of textbooks to determine what she had to work with. Several mothers stopped by during this process, bringing their children to meet the new teacher. Josephine was nervous at first, worried about being judged, but most of the parents seemed simply relieved to have someone young and energetic taking over the position. The children were curious and mostly well-behaved, ranging in age from 6 to 14, representing the dozen or so families in Hill City who could afford to spare their children from work long enough to attend school. Through it all, Josephine found her thoughts drifting to Rob, to his easy smile and kind eyes, to the way he'd made her feel valued and seen in a way she'd never experienced before. She told herself not to read too much into his attention, that he was simply being neighborly, that Western hospitality probably explained his kindness. But at night, lying in her hotel bed, she allowed herself to hope for more. Saturday arrived with crystal-clear skies and temperatures that promised a perfect late summer day. Josephine dressed in her most practical outfit, a split riding skirt she'd purchased on her aunt's advice and a simple white blouse. She braided her hair in a single plait down her back and tried to calm the butterflies in her stomach. Rob arrived exactly on time, leading 2 horses, a rangy buckskin gelding for himself and a pretty gray mare with gentle eyes for Josephine. He helped her mount with patient instructions, adjusting her stirrups and making sure she felt secure before swinging into his own saddle with practiced ease. "We'll take it slow," he promised. "Daisy here knows the trail and she'll take care of you. Just relax and enjoy the ride." They headed south out of town, following a well-worn trail that climbed gradually into the foothills of the Black Hills. Rob kept his word about taking it slow, never pushing the pace beyond a comfortable walk, frequently checking to make sure Josephine was managing all right. She was awkward at first, uncertain of how to move with the horse's rhythm, but Daisy was indeed incredibly patient, and gradually Josephine began to relax into the motion. The landscape unfolding around them was breathtaking. Ponderosa pines rose like cathedral pillars, their bark glowing golden in the sunlight. Aspens shimmered with leaves beginning to hint at autumn gold. Meadows dotted with late summer wildflowers opened up between the trees, and in the distance, the peaks of the Black Hills rose dark and mysterious against the brilliant blue sky. "It's incredible," Josephine breathed, twisting in her saddle to take it all in. "I've never seen anything like this." "The Black Hills are sacred to the Dakota," Rob said quietly. "They call them Pahasapa, the heart of everything that is. Can't say I blame them. There's something special about this land, something that gets into your blood." They rode for perhaps an hour before Rob led them to a small clearing beside a stream so clear Josephine could see every pebble on its bottom. He helped her dismount, catching her when her stiff legs nearly buckled, his hands steady on her waist until she found her balance. "Give it a minute," he said with amusement. "Your legs will remember how to work soon enough." He spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked saddlebags that contained sandwiches, apples, and a canteen of cool water. They settled on the blanket, the sound of the stream providing a peaceful backdrop to their meal. "Tell me about your family," Josephine asked, biting into an apple. "You mentioned your mother, but I don't know anything else about where you come from." Rob leaned back on his elbows, his gaze on the stream. "Not much to tell, really. My father was a farmer in Missouri. Good man, worked hard, loved his family. When my mother died, something broke in him. He kept going through the motions, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. He passed about 5 years later, and honestly, I think it was just his body finally catching up to what his spirit had already done." "That's heartbreaking," Josephine said softly. "It was," Rob agreed. "But it also taught me something about love. My parents had something real, something deep." When you find that kind of connection, you hold on to it with everything you've got, because it's worth more than all the gold in these hills. He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made Josephine's breath catch. I don't believe in wasting time or playing games, Josephine. Life's too short and too uncertain, so I'm just going to say this straight out. I know we've only known each other a week, but I feel something when I'm with you. Something good and right and real. And I'd like to keep spending time with you, getting to know you better, seeing where this might go. If you're interested, that is. Josephine's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. Every sensible part of her brain was screaming caution, reminding her that she barely knew this man, that she'd been hurt before, that she should be careful. But a deeper part of her, the part that had been slowly dying under the weight of Boston's rejection, was singing with hope. "I'm interested," she whispered. "I'm terrified, but I'm interested." Rob sat up, reaching out to take her hand. His fingers were warm and calloused, strong and careful. "What are you afraid of?" Josephine looked down at their joined hands, gathering her courage. "I'm afraid of believing this is real and then discovering it isn't. I'm afraid you'll wake up one day and see me the way everyone else does, the way those people in the hotel dining room saw me. I'm afraid I'll let myself care and then be hurt again." "Look at me," Rob said gently. She raised her eyes to his, finding them blazing with an emotion she didn't dare name. "I see you exactly as you are," he said. "I see a woman who's brave enough to leave everything familiar and start over in a wild territory. I see someone who's kind and intelligent and has a laugh that makes me want to spend all day finding ways to hear it again. I see someone beautiful, and before you argue with me about that, let me tell you what I find beautiful. Strength, honesty, the way your eyes light up when you talk about teaching, the curve of your smile, the soft sound of your voice. All of that is beautiful to me. All of that is you." Tears pricked Josephine's eyes. "Rob, I'm not saying I'm in love with you, not yet," he continued. "We don't know each other well enough for that, but I'm saying I want to get to know you well enough. I want to court you properly, spend time with you, see if what I'm feeling turns into something lasting. And I'm asking if you want that too." Josephine thought about all the reasons she should say no, should protect her heart, should be sensible and cautious. Then she thought about sitting alone in that hotel dining room for the rest of her life, about closing herself off to possibility because of fear. She thought about the way Rob had pulled out that chair, the simple act of inclusion that had changed everything. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want that too." Rob's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture courtly and sweet. "Then we're courting. Fair warning, I'm going to want to see you as much as your schedule and propriety will allow." Josephine laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I think I can manage that." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the stream, talking about everything and nothing. Rob told her stories about his ranch, about the horses he'd trained and the challenges of making a living off the land. Josephine talked about the books she loved, her plans for the school, the mixture of excitement and terror she felt about standing in front of a classroom full of children. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the clearing, Rob reluctantly suggested they head back. The ride to town was slower than the ride out, partly because Josephine was sore and tired, partly because neither of them seemed eager to end the day. At the hotel, Rob helped her dismount, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for today," Josephine said, "for everything. The pleasure was all mine." Rob's smile was warm. "School starts Monday, right? You're going to do wonderfully. Those children are lucky to have you. I hope so." "I know so." He tipped his hat. "I'll be in town next Saturday. Maybe we could have dinner again. I'd like that very much." Josephine watched him ride away, leading the gentle mare that had carried her safely through her first real adventure in the Dakota territory. She stood on the hotel steps until he disappeared from view, then climbed to her room with a smile she couldn't suppress. That night, she wrote a long letter to her sister in Boston, telling her about Hill City and the school and the wild, beautiful country that surrounded it. She mentioned Rob only briefly, cautiously, not wanting to jinx the fragile hope growing in her heart. But as she sealed the envelope, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, coming west had been the best decision of her life. Monday morning dawned cool and bright, the first hint of autumn in the air. Josephine arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early, her stomach aflutter with nerves. She'd laid out her best teaching dress the night before, deep blue with white collar and cuffs, professional but not severe. Now she walked through the empty classroom one final time, making sure everything was perfect. The students began arriving around 8 o'clock, shepherded by parents who wanted to meet the new teacher or simply ensure their children made it to their destination. Josephine greeted each family at the door, learning names and making mental notes about each child. There was Martha Crawford, 8 years old with pigtails and a shy smile, daughter of the school board member Sam Crawford. Her older brother Peter, 12, stood protectively beside her, his eyes serious and assessing. The Johnson twins, identical boys of 10 with matching freckles and mischievous grins. Lucy Walsh, the doctor's daughter, 9 years old and already reading at a level far beyond her age. More children followed: Sarah, Emma, William, James, Grace, and others, until 14 students total filled the schoolhouse with noise and energy. At precisely 8:30, Josephine rang the hand bell that hung by the door, and to her relief, the children settled into their seats with minimal fuss. She stood at the front of the classroom, looking out at the expectant faces, and felt the fear drain away, replaced by a sense of purpose and rightness. "Good morning," she said clearly. "My name is Miss Evans, and I'm very pleased to be your new teacher. We're going to have a wonderful year together, learning many things, but the most important thing we'll learn is how to think for ourselves and ask good questions." She spent the morning assessing what each child knew, gently probing their reading abilities and mathematical knowledge. The range was predictably wide, from little Martha, who was just learning her letters, to Lucy, who could probably have taught half the class herself. But Josephine had experience with mixed-age classrooms, and she began forming plans for how to challenge each student at their level while building a sense of community among the group. At noon, the children dispersed for lunch, most eating meals they'd brought from home, a few running home if they lived close enough. Josephine sat at her desk, reviewing her notes from the morning when a knock sounded at the door. She looked up to find Rob leaning in the doorway, hat in hand, a smile playing around his lips. "Mr. Foster," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "What brings you to town on a Monday?" "Had some business with the feed store," he said, though his eyes suggested that might not be the whole truth. "Thought I'd stop by and see how your first morning went. Figured you might need some encouragement, though it looks like you've got everything well in hand." "It's going well, I think. The children are lovely, very eager to learn, most of them." She gestured to the classroom. "What do you think of my domain?" Rob stepped inside, his tall frame making the schoolhouse seem suddenly smaller. He examined the room with genuine interest, noting the books on the shelves, the maps on the walls, the careful arrangement of desks. "It looks like a place where real learning could happen. You've made it warm, inviting. The kids are lucky." "I'm the lucky one," Josephine said. "Getting to do work I love in a place that seems to appreciate it. That's more than I ever had in Boston." Rob perched on the edge of her desk, looking down at her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "I've been thinking about you all weekend. Couldn't stop, actually. It's becoming a problem for my productivity." Josephine laughed softly, glancing toward the door to make sure no students were returning early. "I've been thinking about you too," she admitted, "though I'm trying to focus on lesson plans and classroom management. How's that working out?" "Not as well as I'd hoped." Rob's grin was delighted. "Good. Misery loves company." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "I should let you eat your lunch in peace, but I wanted you to know I'm thinking of you, and I hope the rest of your day goes well. Thank you for stopping by." It was a lovely surprise. He tipped his hat and left, and Josephine sat at her desk with a smile she couldn't quite suppress, thinking that maybe being distracted wasn't the worst thing in the world. The rest of the first day went smoothly, and the rest of the first week even better. Josephine fell into the rhythm of teaching, discovering that she loved it even more than she'd anticipated. The children were responsive, curious, and with a few exceptions, well-behaved. She taught reading and writing in the mornings, arithmetic and history in the afternoons, and always ended the day with a story, reading aloud from books that had the children leaning forward in their seats, eager for more. True to his word, Rob came to town every Saturday, and they fell into a pattern of spending the day together. Sometimes they rode out into the countryside, Rob continuing to teach her about horses and the land. Sometimes they simply walked through Hill City, Rob introducing her to more residents, Josephine feeling increasingly like she belonged in this rough frontier town. With each meeting, Josephine learned more about the man Rob Foster was. He was hardworking and honest, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He was kind to everyone he encountered, from the wealthiest merchant to the poorest prospector down on his luck. He spoke thoughtfully about the world, about politics and philosophy, proving that his lack of formal education hadn't hindered his sharp intelligence. And he was patient. He never pushed her for more than she was ready to give, never made her feel rushed or pressured. He was content to let their relationship develop naturally, building friendship alongside romance, creating a foundation that felt solid and real. Autumn deepened, painting the aspens gold and bringing cooler temperatures. 6 weeks after Josephine had arrived in Hill City, Rob invited her to visit his ranch, an invitation she accepted with equal parts excitement and nervousness. It felt like a significant step, seeing where he lived, the place he'd built with his own hands. They made the ride on a crisp October Saturday, the world around them ablaze with fall color. Rob's ranch lay in a beautiful valley, protected from the worst winds by hills on 3 sides. The house was indeed small, but well built and well maintained, with a stone chimney and real glass windows. The barn and corrals were neat and sturdy, and several horses grazed in the meadow beyond, their coats shining in the autumn sun. "Welcome to the Foster Ranch," Rob said, helping her dismount. "It's not much, but it's home." "It's wonderful," Josephine said honestly. She could see the care and pride evident in every detail. The flower boxes on the windows that had clearly been planted by someone who appreciated beauty. The solid construction that spoke of permanence and planning for the future. A young man emerged from the barn, lanky and sunburned, probably 19 or 20. "Boss," he called, then stopped short when he saw Josephine. "Tommy, this is Miss Evans, the school teacher I've told you about." "Josephine, this is Tommy Reed, my right hand and the better horseman between the two of us, though don't tell him I said that." Tommy's face flushed red, but he grinned and ducked his head in greeting. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Evans. Rob hasn't stopped talking about you since. He caught Rob's warning look and cleared his throat. "Since you arrived in Hill City, we're all glad to have a proper teacher in town." "Thank you, Tommy. It's nice to meet you as well." Rob showed her around the ranch, explaining his breeding program and introducing her to individual horses like they were old friends. Josephine was charmed by the way he spoke to the animals, gentle and respectful, and by the clear affection they showed him in return. These weren't just livestock to him. They were partners in his work, creatures deserving of care and kindness. Inside the house, Josephine found a space that was sparse but comfortable. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and a few personal touches that made it feel like home. A photograph of what must have been his parents on the mantel, a collection of books on a shelf, a quilt in a wedding ring pattern draped over the back of a chair. "My mother made that quilt," Rob said, noticing her looking at it. "It's one of the few things I have from her. She gave it to me before she died, said I'd need it when I found someone to share my life with." He paused, then added quietly, "I've been thinking lately that maybe she was right." Josephine's breath caught. They'd been courting for over a month now, spending every available moment together, but neither had spoken explicitly about the future beyond the next meeting. Hearing Rob acknowledge what lay between them made it suddenly real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "Rob," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He crossed to where she stood, taking her hands in his. "I know it hasn't been long. I know by Boston standards we're moving at a reckless pace. But out here, time moves differently. When you know something is right, when you feel it in your bones, you don't waste time pretending otherwise." "What are you saying?" Josephine whispered, though she thought she knew, hoped she knew. "I'm saying I love you," Rob said simply. "I've loved you since that first night in the hotel dining room, if I'm being honest. I loved your courage and your dignity, and the way you held your head high, even when it must have hurt. I've loved watching you with your students, seeing how you light up when you talk about teaching. I love your laugh and your mind and your kind heart. I love every single thing about you, Josephine Evans, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both impossible and inevitable. "I never thought I'd feel this way, never thought anyone would see me the way you do. But I love you, Rob Foster, and I want that future you're talking about." Rob cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "Then marry me. Be my wife. Build a life with me here in this wild, beautiful place. I can't promise you luxury or an easy life, but I can promise you'll be loved and valued and cherished every single day." "Yes," Josephine breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." Rob's kiss was gentle and reverent, full of promise and hope. Josephine melted into him, feeling like she was finally home after a lifetime of searching. They sat together on the small porch as the sun set, wrapped in his mother's wedding ring quilt, making plans and dreaming dreams. They'd marry in the spring, they decided, giving Josephine time to finish her first year of teaching and Rob time to add on to his house, making it suitable for a wife and, hopefully eventually, a family. "Your aunt will probably insist on a proper wedding," Rob said, amusement in his voice. "Margaret's already been dropping hints about how Hill City needs more social events. Are you prepared for that?" Josephine asked. "Being the center of attention at a big to-do, I'd walk through fire for you, so I can probably manage a wedding." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Besides, I want everyone to see me marry you, want them all to know that you chose me, that I'm the luckiest man in the Dakota territory." Josephine laughed, the sound pure joy. "I think I'm the lucky one. Then we're both lucky. I can live with that." They rode back to Hill City as the stars emerged, talking and laughing and stealing kisses when the trail allowed. At the hotel, Rob helped her down and held her close for a long moment. "I'll talk to your aunt tomorrow. Ask for her blessing formally," he said. "It's old-fashioned, but it seems right. She's going to be insufferably pleased with herself," Josephine warned. "She's been trying to matchmake since I arrived. Then at least I'll make one person happy." Rob's smile was tender. "Though really, I'm most concerned with making you happy." "You do," Josephine assured him. "More than I ever thought possible." News of their engagement spread through Hill City faster than wildfire. Aunt Margaret was indeed insufferably pleased, immediately beginning to plan what she declared would be the social event of the season. The school board members congratulated Josephine, promising that married teachers were welcome and that her position was secure as long as she wanted it. The townsfolk who'd been kind from the beginning offered their best wishes, and even some who'd been initially cool warmed considerably. But not everyone was pleased. A few days after the engagement was announced, Josephine was working late at the schoolhouse when 3 women entered, their faces arranged in expressions of concern that didn't quite mask the judgment beneath. Miss Evans, the leader, a woman named Constance Burton whose husband owned the largest saloon in town, said with false sweetness, "We wanted to have a word with you, woman to woman." Josephine set down her chalk and turned to face them. "Of course, Mrs. Burton. How can I help you?" "Well, we've been hearing these rumors about you and Robert Foster, and we felt it was our Christian duty to offer some advice." Constance glanced at her companions, who nodded encouragingly. "You seem like a nice girl, educated and proper, and we'd hate to see you make a mistake." "A mistake?" Josephine repeated carefully. "Mr. Foster is a good man. No one's disputing that, but he's also practical. Ranching is hard work, and he needs a wife who can, well, contribute. A man in his position can't afford to be romantic about these things. He needs someone who can work hard, who won't be a burden." Constance's smile was pitying. "We just want you to be realistic about what he's likely expecting from a wife, and whether you're suited for that kind of life." The implication was crystal clear, and Josephine felt anger rise hot and sharp in her chest. But years of Boston society had taught her how to maintain composure under attack. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Burton," she said evenly. "But I'm quite confident that Rob knows exactly what he's getting in a wife. After all, he's the one who proposed, and he's not a man who makes important decisions without thought." Of course," another woman chimed in, "but men can be fooled by a pretty face and sweet words. They don't always think about the practical side of things until it's too late." "Is there something specific you'd like to say to me?" Josephine asked, her patience wearing thin. "Because if you have concerns about my character or my suitability as a teacher, I'm happy to address them directly. But if you're simply here to suggest that I'm not good enough for the man I love, then I'm afraid we have nothing further to discuss." Constance's face flushed. "Well, we were just trying to help." "Were you?" Josephine challenged. "Because it seems to me you were trying to plant seeds of doubt and make me feel inadequate. But here's the thing, Mrs. Burton. I spent 22 years letting people like you make me feel that way. I'm not interested in continuing that pattern. Rob Foster loves me exactly as I am, and I love him. That's really all that matters." She turned back to her work, dismissing them as clearly as if she'd asked them to leave. After a moment of sputtering indignation, the 3 women departed, and Josephine allowed herself to shake with the aftermath of confrontation. But beneath the anger and hurt was also pride. She'd stood up for herself, for her relationship, for her right to be loved and happy. It felt like victory. When she told Rob about the encounter later, his jaw went tight with anger. "Those bitter biddies need to find better hobbies than tearing down other people's happiness. You want me to have a word with them?" "No," Josephine said firmly. "I handled it, and I'll keep handling it. There will always be people who judge, who can't stand to see others happy. But I'm not going to let them ruin this. I'm not going to let them take away what we have." Rob pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "That's my fierce lady. I love that about you, your strength. Don't ever let anyone make you doubt yourself or us." "I won't," Josephine promised. Not anymore. Winter came to the Black Hills with dramatic suddenness. One week the weather was mild and pleasant. The next, snow was falling in thick white curtains and temperatures plummeted below freezing. Josephine found teaching in the winter months challenging. Starting the wood stove early each morning to warm the schoolhouse, dismissing students early when blizzards threatened, worrying about those who had long walks home through the cold. Rob came to town less frequently, the weather and ranch work making the journey difficult. But he sent letters via the mail stage, and once, during a particularly fierce storm, he rode through a near blizzard just to make sure Josephine was safe, then had to stay at the hotel for 3 days until the weather cleared enough for him to return home. They spent those stolen days together, sitting by the hotel fireplace, talking and reading and simply being together. It was during one of these cozy afternoons that they discussed the wedding plans in earnest. "I don't need anything fancy," Josephine said, leaning against Rob's shoulder. "Just our friends and family, some simple vows, and you." "You're making this easy on me," Rob teased. "But you should have the wedding you want, Josephine. If you want fancy, we'll figure out how to make it fancy." "What I want is to be married to you," she said simply. "Everything else is just decoration." They settled on the first Saturday in May, after the school year ended and before ranch work became too demanding. The wedding would be at the Hill City Church, followed by a reception at Aunt Margaret's boarding house. It would be simple but beautiful, a celebration of love and new beginnings. As winter deepened, Josephine threw herself into teaching and wedding planning, finding joy in both. Her students thrived under her instruction, even the most reluctant learners showing improvement. She organized a Christmas pageant that had the whole town talking, wrote regular letters to her family in Boston updating them on her new life, and counted down the days until she could become Mrs. Robert Foster. In February, a letter arrived from her mother. Josephine opened it with trepidation, expecting disapproval or disappointment. Instead, she found surprising support. "Your father and I have discussed your engagement at length," her mother wrote in her precise script. "While we would have preferred you marry someone from a more established family, someone we know, we cannot deny that your letters have shown a happiness we never saw in you here in Boston. If this Mr. Foster makes you truly happy, then we give our blessing. Your sister Emily sends her love and says she's thrilled for you. She wants all the details about your wedding dress." Josephine read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't everything she might have hoped for, but it was enough. Her family accepted her choice, supported her happiness. That mattered more than she'd realized. She showed the letter to Rob that Saturday, and he read it carefully before folding it and handing it back. "I'd like to meet them someday," he said. "Your family. Let them see that I'm taking good care of their daughter." "I'd like that too," Josephine said. "Maybe they could visit next summer after we're settled. Our door will always be open to them." As winter slowly gave way to spring, Josephine and Rob made preparations for their married life. Rob added 2 rooms onto his house, creating a proper bedroom and a small study where Josephine could work on her lesson plans and keep her books. He built furniture with his own hands, a wardrobe for her clothes, a desk and chair for her study, a larger bed for them to share. Josephine spent her free time sewing linens, curtains, and a new quilt to add to his mother's. She collected recipes from Kate and the other women in town, determined to learn how to cook hearty ranch meals even though her skills in that area were limited. She ordered a few new dresses appropriate for ranch life, recognizing that her Boston wardrobe wouldn't survive long in her new environment. In April, a package arrived from Boston containing Josephine's wedding dress, a gift from her mother and sister. It was beautiful, cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, simpler than the elaborate confections popular in Boston but perfect for a frontier wedding. Josephine tried it on in her hotel room and cried at how beautiful she felt, how loved. The last day of the school year arrived in late April, and Josephine dismissed her students with hugs and promises to see them all in the fall. Several of the older children had made remarkable progress, and she felt proud of what they'd accomplished together. As she locked the schoolhouse door for the summer, she felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with excitement. When she returned in September, she'd be a married woman, her name changed, her life transformed. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of final preparations. Aunt Margaret was in her element, orchestrating every detail with military precision. The church ladies decorated the sanctuary with wildflowers and pine boughs. Kate prepared a feast for the reception. Friends and neighbors arrived with gifts, quilts, dishes, tools, and supplies to help the newlyweds start their life together. Rob stayed at the ranch during this final week, allowing tradition to keep them apart but sending daily letters that made Josephine laugh and cry in equal measure. In his last letter before the wedding, he wrote, "I've been thinking about that first night in the hotel, how I saw you standing there and something in me just knew you were important. Turns out my instincts were right. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life discovering all the ways you make my world better. See you at the altar, my love." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, spring in all its glory transforming the Black Hills into a wonderland of green and gold. Josephine woke early in her hotel room, too excited to sleep, and spent the morning with her aunt and several friends who helped her dress and prepare. When she finally saw herself in the full-length mirror the hotel had provided, she barely recognized the woman looking back. The dress fit perfectly, emphasizing curves she'd always been taught to hide. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, with small white flowers woven through the dark strands. But more than the external changes, she saw something different in her eyes: confidence, joy, and the certainty of being exactly where she belonged. "You look absolutely radiant," Aunt Margaret said, dabbing at her eyes. "Robert Foster is a lucky, lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Josephine replied, and meant it. The walk to the church was short, and Josephine made it on her aunt's arm, greeting well-wishers who'd gathered to watch the bride's procession. Inside the church, every pew was full, the entire town turning out to celebrate. But Josephine barely saw them. Her eyes found Rob standing at the altar and locked there, everything else fading into insignificance. He looked magnificent in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven, his eyes bright with emotion as he watched her walk toward him. When she reached his side, he took her hand and whispered, "You're so beautiful I can hardly breathe." The ceremony itself was simple and moving. They spoke traditional vows, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Rob's kiss was tender and full of promise, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception at Aunt Margaret's was a joyous celebration. There was more food than they could possibly eat, music provided by a few local musicians, dancing and laughter, and toasts from friends old and new. Tommy gave a short speech about how Rob had been insufferable for months, mooning around the ranch and grinning like a fool, but how happy he was to see his boss so clearly in love. Kate told embarrassing stories about both bride and groom. Even some of the people who'd been initially cool about their relationship seemed caught up in the celebration, offering genuine congratulations and good wishes. As the sun began to set, Rob and Josephine slipped away from the party, riding together toward the ranch and their new life. They traveled slowly, savoring the evening light and the knowledge that they were finally, officially, irrevocably bound together. At the ranch, Rob carried Josephine over the threshold of their home, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. Inside, the house glowed with lamplight and warmth. Tommy had made himself scarce for the evening, staying with a friend in town to give the newlyweds privacy. "Welcome home, Mrs. Foster," Rob said, setting Josephine gently on her feet. "Mrs. Foster," Josephine repeated, testing the name. "I like the sound of that." That night, they came together as husband and wife with tenderness and passion, creating new memories in the home Rob had built. Afterward, lying wrapped in his mother's quilt, Josephine felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. This was what she'd been searching for without even knowing it: love, acceptance, belonging. "Happy," Rob murmured, his hand tracing gentle patterns on her shoulder. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Josephine replied. "Thank you for pulling out that chair, for asking me to sit by you. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else was looking away." "Thank you for saying yes," Rob countered, "for taking a chance on a cowboy and his wild dreams." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the first night of forever stretching out before them, filled with possibility. The next months were an adjustment as Josephine learned to be a ranch wife while maintaining her identity as a teacher. The work was hard, harder than anything she'd done in Boston, but also more satisfying. She learned to cook hearty meals, to tend a garden, to help with the horses when extra hands were needed. Rob was patient with her learning curve, never making her feel inadequate, always appreciating her efforts. In return, Josephine brought things to the ranch that had been missing: music and laughter, books read aloud by the fire on cold evenings, thoughtful conversations about everything from politics to philosophy. She helped Rob with his accounts, her education making quick work of the numbers he'd always struggled with. She befriended Tommy, becoming the sister he'd never had, teaching him to read better and encouraging his natural talent with the horses. That summer, her parents and sister made the long journey from Boston to visit. It was awkward at first, her mother clearly shocked by the rustic conditions and hard work of ranch life. But by the end of their 2-week stay, even her mother had to admit that Josephine was thriving in ways she never had in Boston. Her father and Rob spent long hours talking about horses and land management, developing a mutual respect. Her sister, Emily, declared the whole experience wildly romantic and spent most of her visit mooning over Tommy, much to everyone's amusement. When her family departed, her mother hugged Josephine tightly and whispered, "I was wrong to think you needed what Boston offered. You needed this freedom and love. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." "It's all right, Mama," Josephine said, meaning it. "I'm just glad you see it now." September came, and Josephine returned to teaching, now riding to the schoolhouse from the ranch 3 days a week and staying at Aunt Margaret's the other 2 nights to avoid the long daily ride. It was a good balance, allowing her to continue work she loved while building her marriage and home. The following spring, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both her and Rob with joy and anticipation. They spent the summer preparing, Rob building a cradle with his own hands, Josephine sewing tiny clothes and blankets. The whole community rallied around them, the women offering advice and assistance, the men helping Rob with ranch work as Josephine's pregnancy advanced. In December of 1879, on a snowy evening with the fireplace crackling and Rob holding her hand, Josephine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Daniel Foster, honoring both Tommy, who'd become like family, and Rob's father. The baby was perfect, with his father's warm brown eyes and his mother's dark hair, and Josephine felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known possible. Rob was a devoted father, tending to his son with the same gentle care he showed his horses. He'd walk the floor with Thomas in the middle of the night, singing soft lullabies his own mother had taught him. He'd cradle the baby in one arm while working with the other, never complaining about the disruption to his routine. "He's perfect," Rob would say over and over, staring at his son with wonder. "We made something perfect." Josephine returned to teaching part-time once Thomas was old enough, bringing him to the schoolhouse where the students doted on him. She discovered she loved being a mother almost as much as she loved teaching, though the juggling act was exhausting. But with Rob's support and the help of friends, she managed to find a balance that worked for their family. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Rebecca Margaret Foster, named for Rob's mother and Josephine's aunt. Where Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, Rebecca was loud and adventurous, keeping them constantly on their toes. Rob declared that his daughter would grow up knowing how to ride and rope as well as any boy, and Josephine added that she'd also know how to read and think for herself. The years passed in a blur of hard work and deep satisfaction. The ranch prospered, Rob's reputation for quality horses spreading throughout the territory. Josephine's school grew, the community recognizing the value of education and supporting her efforts. Their children thrived, healthy and happy, growing up wild and free in the beautiful Black Hills. In 1884, 6 years after their wedding, Josephine stood on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and purple. Thomas, now 5, was helping his father tend the horses in the corral. Rebecca, 3, was playing with a doll at Josephine's feet. Inside, a new baby, their 3rd child and 2nd son, William Robert, was sleeping peacefully in his cradle. Rob emerged from the barn and walked toward the house, Thomas running ahead of him. When he reached the porch, he pulled Josephine close and pressed a kiss to her temple. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, as he always did when he found her in reflective moods. "I was thinking about that night in the hotel dining room," Josephine said. "About how terrified I was, how humiliated, how certain I was that coming to Hill City had been a terrible mistake. And now," Rob prompted, "now I know it was the best decision I ever made." Josephine turned to look at her husband, this man who'd seen her when others looked away, who'd pulled out a chair and changed her entire life. "You saved me that night, Rob Foster. You showed me that I was worth saving. You were always worth it, Josephine. I just had the good sense to recognize what everyone else was too blind to see." He tightened his arm around her waist. "Though if we're being honest, you saved me just as much. This ranch, this life, it was all empty before you. You made it home." They stood together watching their children play as the sun slipped below the horizon. 2 people who'd found each other against unlikely odds and built something beautiful from that chance encounter. The wind carried the scent of pine and the distant sound of horses neighing, and Josephine thought there was no place on earth she'd rather be. In the years that followed, the Foster family became a cornerstone of Hill City. Josephine taught multiple generations of children, earning a reputation as one of the finest educators in the Dakota territory. Rob's ranch expanded, providing good horses and better employment to young men learning the trade. Their children grew up strong and confident, loved and supported, free from the judgments that had once nearly broken their mother. Thomas became a veterinarian, studying in Chicago before returning to Hill City to serve the ranching community. Rebecca shocked everyone by becoming one of the first women to attend the South Dakota School of Mines, eventually working as a mining engineer. William followed in his father's footsteps, taking over the ranch and expanding it further. But success and prosperity were never the point. The point was the love that had started with a simple act of kindness, with a cowboy pulling out a chair and inviting a hurting woman to sit by him. That love sustained them through hard times and good, through loss and celebration, through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a life. Rob and Josephine grew old together on their ranch in the Black Hills, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing down, but their love only deepening with time. They sat together on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, telling the same stories over and over to grandchildren, who never tired of hearing about how their grandparents met. "Tell us about the hotel," the grandchildren would beg, and Josephine would recount that night, making it dramatic and funny, emphasizing the moment when Rob had stood up and crossed the room like a hero from one of her books. "And then Grandpa said the magic words," she'd finish, her eyes twinkling. "Sit by me," the children would chorus, knowing the story by heart. Rob would always add his own ending, and she did. Thank God she did. Everything good in my life started with that moment. It was true. From that simple beginning, they'd built a lifetime of love, created a family, touched countless lives through their work and their example. They'd proven that beauty wasn't about conforming to someone else's standards. That worth wasn't measured in inches or pounds. That love found on its own terms was the strongest force in the world. In the spring of 1920, Rob passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 69, his beloved wife of 42 years holding his hand. Josephine grieved deeply, but found comfort in knowing they'd had more than many people ever dreamed of. She lived another 5 years, remaining sharp and engaged until the end, still telling stories about the cowboy who'd changed her life with a simple invitation. When she died in 1925 at the age of 69, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were about that first night in Hill City, about the moment she'd been shown kindness when she expected cruelty, about the chair that had been pulled out and the invitation that had changed everything. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, under the vast Dakota sky they'd both loved. Their headstone was simple: Robert and Josephine Foster, beloved partners in all things. Love endures, and it did endure. Their children told their story to their own children, passing down not just the tale of how they met, but the values they'd embodied. Kindness over judgment, character over appearance, love that saw beyond surface and straight to soul. The story of the cowboy who pulled out a chair became part of Hill City's folklore, told and retold as an example of what really mattered in life. The Foster Ranch continued to operate for generations, remaining in the family and maintaining the standards Rob had established. The schoolhouse where Josephine taught was eventually named in her honor, a bronze plaque installed explaining how this remarkable woman had educated hundreds of children and never turned anyone away based on their background or circumstances. In the end, what had started as a moment of simple human decency had rippled outward, touching lives and changing futures in ways neither Rob nor Josephine could have predicted. They'd been cast aside and overlooked, both of them in different ways, and they'd found each other and built something that lasted beyond their own lifetimes. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, full of adventure and hardship, triumph and challenge. But at its heart, It was simply the story of two people who recognized in each other something precious and chose to honor that recognition every day for the rest of their lives. And it all began with a chair pulled out and an invitation given, with a woman brave enough to accept it and a man brave enough to offer it. Everything else, all the joy and love and family and meaning that followed, flowed from that single moment when Rob Foster looked at Josephine Evans and said the words that would echo through generations. "Sit by me." She had. And in doing so, she'd found not just a seat at a table, but a place in the world, a home in a heart, and a love that would endure long after the Wild West was tamed, and the frontier became history. Their story became legend, proof that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with grand gestures but with simple kindness, not with perfect people but with real ones who choose each other, despite what the world might say. In Hill City, South Dakota, where the Black Hills rise dark and beautiful against the sky, where the wind still carries the scent of pine and possibility, the story of Rob and Josephine Foster lives on. It's told to children learning about kindness, to young people learning about love, to anyone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' narrow judgments, that somewhere there's someone who will pull out a chair and invite them to sit down, someone who will see them truly and love them completely. And that is the greatest love story of all, not the one that's perfect from the start, but the one that's built moment by moment, choice by choice, act of kindness by act of kindness, until it becomes something that outlasts even death itself. Rob and Josephine knew that truth, lived it fully, and left it as a legacy for all who came after. The chair was pulled out, the invitation was given, the love was real, and that made all the difference.